Hello, my name is Daryl Weilberg, and I am a practicing Jehovah's Witness in good standing. Now, if you want to know anything at all about the Jehovah's Witnesses, try going right there, right to the jw.org, right there. All your questions can be answered right there. This video, it's not approved by those people. That's the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society of Pennsylvania, which the United States government requires to handle donations and business affairs of Jehovah's Witnesses. And it's not approved by the 8 faithful members of that governing body located there in Warwick, New York. And it's not approved by any local body of elders. I don't work for the elders, I don't work for the governing body, and I don't work for the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society of Pennsylvania. Hey, my boss, my leader, my king is Jesus Christ. He's up there in heaven, and he's my leader, my only leader. Matthew 23:10. Read it. It might help you out someday. Today is the third part of a 4-part series. And this is proof, this series here is proof that the governments of Belgium, Netherlands, and the Royal Australian Commission, which was set up by the government, are liars, they're frauds. And I think those people should be arrested for the fraud that they perpetrated on the public of the world. Because you see, their lies and innuendos and caustic language against the Jehovah's Witnesses have spread throughout the world, and there's no evidence to back any of it up. And wait till you see what this Professor Holly Folk from the Western University, Washington University, has to say about it. She did the research. And I just want to reach out to Dr. Folk, just in case she happens to hear this video or any of these videos, and tell her thank you. And that her work is actually part of proof of a prophecy that Jesus provided some 2,000 years ago. On his Sermon on the Mount, which some people call the Beatitudes, the happy are you, Jesus made this statement at Matthew 5 and verse 11. Happy are you when people persecute you and lyingly say every sort of wicked thing about you for my sake. Rejoice and be joyful, because your reward in heaven, your reward is greater in the heavens. So we're not looking for any reward on the earth. And then it goes on and it says, for in that way they persecuted the prophets before you. You see, Jesus knew that this was going to happen. He knew that these morons out here were going to, these apostate morons were going to badmouth us and lyingly say a lot of stuff about us. Now, I waited a little bit between part 2 and part 3 here because I wanted to see what the fallout would be. And sure enough, Vinny, the bandana head Vincent, crawled out from his rock, under his rock. And there he is, the wannabe biker. He wears a bandana on his head. He thinks he's cool. He's about as cool as a heart attack. But he had this video. Now, I have not listened to his video. I don't have to listen to his video to know what he had to say. He probably badmouthed Dr. Folk. And it's sad, too, because, see, Dr. Folk doesn't have a horse in this race. She has no hidden agendas. She really doesn't. She's unbiased. She's balanced. And she did the work. Let's hear what Dr. Folk has to say.
So to move to talk about the reports from Belgium and the Netherlands, this is a little bit convoluted, And it's hard because some of the stuff is behind paywalls, so it's hard to read some of the articles that were important for this. But a couple of years ago, a number of articles ran in a Dutch newspaper, I'm going to butcher my Dutch, called Trouw, which means truth. It turns out to be a newspaper that is run with the backing of the Reformed Church in the Netherlands. And so we need to realize that this is a newspaper that has a national distribution, but it's also a newspaper with an active faith commitment behind it. And so they ran a series of articles accusing the Jehovah's Witness organization of covering cases or hiding cases of sexual abuse. With this, they worked very closely with at least one organization of activists, of former Jehovah's Witness members, who provided allegedly or reported that there were about 285 or 286 complaints from former members that had been collected from by this organization. As a consequence of this, there were, with the involvement of these articles, with these articles standing behind it, the two different studies were launched in Europe over the past couple of years. And there's a little bit of circularity to this. One was the Center for Information, CIAOSN, Sausen, which is a Belgian organization. It's an anti-cult organization. And they cited the newspaper articles that had run in the Netherlands as the rationale for running a study of the activities of the Jehovah's Witness organization in Belgium. So the main basis of the Belgian study was the Netherlands journalism. Now, I would like to talk about the findings of the Belgian study, but I have to say that there was very, very little information that was found or that was discovered in their inquiry. They reported newspaper accounts. They reported sort of very derogatory information about the Jehovah's Witness organization overall. And they reported that the Netherlands inquiry had uncovered 3 different complaints that had possible ties to Belgium, and they said on the basis of that an inquiry should go forward and the recommendations from the Australian studies should be adopted. But I honestly, I mean, I reviewed this, but I didn't see enough findings to really sort of say, here are the findings, because they didn't come forward with math or reports of complaints that could really be dissected. It was very much a disappointment.
Hello. Were you shocked at that first part there from Dr. Folk? You should be. Now you have to notice that the newspaper from the Netherlands that ran the stories about the JWs, Jehovah's Witnesses, and cover-up of child molestation was operated by the Reformed Church in the Netherlands. Do you think they had a hidden agenda? The newspaper was called in English Truth, and it was packed full of lies. They are liars, and they have a hidden agenda. Now, they worked with apostates, ex-Jehovah's Witnesses. These ex-Jehovah's Witnesses provided that there were 286 complaints from former JWs on the basis of these false allegations. 2 studies were launched in Europe. One was the Sausen study, Belgian organization, an anti-cult organization. Now this farce used the newspaper articles from the Netherlands, the Reformed Church. Ironically, there's no documentation. Professor Folk found no support, no evidence of any of these lying organizations. Now, they provided news reports and derogatory remarks against the Jehovah's Witnesses without any evidence. In other words, they found fault with our beliefs, but they couldn't produce any evidence of any molestations. None whatsoever. There were reportedly 3 false complaints tied to the Belgium organization. The basis of that claim, which had no corroboration. There was no evidence, but they recommended to continue. And to add the Australian Royal Commission's false findings. Yeah, they actually added the Royal Commission. Remember the Royal Commission, the Australian Royal Commission? Out of 1,800 supposedly complaints, they interviewed 2 people. And Professor Folk could not find any math or any complaints that could be investigated. In the Dutch study, they lied about having 751 complaints. Of course, the media jumped all over that. 700 complaints, 700 perpetrators are running around in the Netherlands without recourse molesters. The Dutch countryside, they were running around the Dutch countryside. Now the government was using religious propaganda, politicized scholarship. They did this by taking a survey, and we're going to find out about that in a moment.
But here is the other thing. The Belgian study was commissioned and released first. It came before the government in Belgium after the piece came before the government in the Netherlands. So there's sort of an overlap in terms of their construction and their being brought forward. It's important to note that the Sousen study was done in cooperation with the Belgian Parliament. And similarly, there's government backing behind the study that was done in the Netherlands. Now, I'm not even going to try to pronounce the Dutch title of this study. I'll just sort of refer to it by English. And the Dutch study was called Sexual Abuse and Willingness to Report Within the Community of Jehovah's Witnesses. I reviewed this piece, the work here, and so there are a number of different things I want to say about it, and then we can talk about the studies overall and their collective sort of problems and findings. In the Dutch study, they reported having 751 complaints. And this number also was very, very quickly converted into the media with the idea that there were more than 700 Jehovah's Witnesses perpetrators who were sort of running at large in society. So here's what we need to sort of know about the Dutch study. It was commissioned in cooperation with the Center for the Ministry of Justice and Public Safety. It was commissioned with the help of certain government agencies that in the Netherlands have been accused of having very sort of politicized scholarship. And they ran a survey that had sort of 2 components. It had a telephone line one could call, and it had an email address box that you could send sort of your responses to. But they didn't vet the survey responses for unusable answers. And so hang-ups, duplicate answers, answers that looked like they had been deliberately written by people who were simply trolls who wanted to write something detractory about the Jehovah's Witness organization. All of those were counted as valid complaints. And so in other words, if you were writing in to answer and your internet connection broke and you had to resubmit the study, you are now considered 2 different complaints. And this is regardless of whether or not your complaint was even perceived as credible. And so if you were somebody who was trying to send an uncredible complaint, then that was not really sort of factored in, and it was very, very easy to corrupt this data. The other thing about this is that along with, in a way that's very similar to the Dutch study or to the Belgian study and the Australian study, all 3 studies worked with the notion that family abuse could and should be converted over to institutional abuse. Okay, the other thing about the the Dutch study that's significant is that the Dutch researchers interviewed 10 people in conjunction with their survey. Now, remember, the Australian study only interviewed two survivors, but 10 survivors were interviewed in the Dutch study. And here's what we have. 4 of those interviewees were not raised as Jehovah's Witnesses, and they were very likely reporting incidents in the past about situations where the Jehovah's Witnesses had absolutely no auspices whatsoever. And 7 of the cases of those 10 were more than 5 years old at the time of the study. And so in other words, if there was something where a police report were appropriate, the question one might ask is, why hadn't it been filed outside of the time before this was actually disclosed to the JW organization? So
I'm back. You know, I hope you're paying attention here to this Dr. Folk, and I hope you watch her entire video, because it's really amazing. And there's also another video that was taken by another professor, and I'm going to get into that one probably in part 4. But this Dutch and Belgium places, this organizations, they did this by running a survey. This is how they gathered their information. They ran a survey by telephone or email. They had a form you could fill out on the email. They did not vet the telephone or email responses. So they don't know how many were true and how many were made by apostates like Vinny, the bandana head, Vincent. Did you have anything to do with that, Vinny? Did you call into him? Yeah, you could call in 3 or 4 times. And even if you did get legitimately cut off, if you came back on, you were counted twice. So guys like Vinny, Smurf, the Skim and Smicky morons, they could all call or email many times. Kind of similar to what the apostates, ex-JWs, have done to me over here in this country. Oh yeah, they've impersonated Jehovah's Witnesses. They've called the branch on me for making YouTube videos like this. They called Fountain Hills congregation. They duped a moron there, calls himself an elder, into talking to the Smurf idiot. The Smurf idiot did that. He slandered me and gossiped about me. And they've done nothing about him, which I don't care. I attended that hall some 6 years ago. And the complaints they complained that I was a bad JW. Basically, they didn't know if the apostates were making the calls and emails. So the data was corrupted that were used in both of these studies. And of course, they used the Australian study as well, which was corrupted. They combined false with the true, if there was any truth. The Dutch study interviewed 10 people. They interviewed 10 people. Out of those 10 people, 4 of them were molested before they even became Jehovah's Witnesses. What? Yeah. 7 of them Seven were over 5 years old, and there was no evidence of criminal complaints filed anywhere. They had no evidence. Isn't it amazing what Dr. Folk's research did? The Australian Royal Commission, the Belgian Commission, the Netherlands Commission were frauds perpetrated upon their constituents in those countries. You know the worst part about it is it overflowed to this country. There is no fact behind these. There is no secret database that the Jehovah's Witnesses have. None. these governments used religious organizations to badmouth the Jehovah's Witnesses. Imagine that. You know, Russia's doing the same thing now. They're persecuting my brothers because Putin is an Orthodox. And that's what the Orthodox are behind the government, and they're getting rid of my brothers there in Russia. I don't know how they sleep at night, but yeah, I guess they do because Satan backs them. But there you have it, folks. The Belgium, the Netherlands, and the Australian Royal Commission were frauds perpetrated upon the people of those countries. Complete and utter frauds. No evidence, maybe a scintilla of evidence. And those two agencies or organizations that were backed by the governments there in Belgium and the Netherlands did the same thing that the Australian Commission did. They congregated in-family molestations with institutional molestations, trying to blame everything on the Jehovah's Witness organization. That's a fraud. That's criminal. What those three countries did was criminal. And I don't care how you cut that mustard, it was criminal. It's too bad the World Court don't get involved in that and stop this farce from continuing in the tabloids. These people used the tabloids for their information. They used a religious newspaper called The Truth in the Netherlands. What's up with that? Why don't you people research like Dr. Folk did? Why don't you look at her videos, her video, and then send her, you can look at research her online, send her a little note that you appreciate the work she did. Thanks for watching this video. Stop the propaganda against the Jehovah's Witnesses. It's a fraud. Don't be part of it.